every biography from Coolidge forward to include himself. And I was poking fun at this and saying how remarkable it was that the president was such a narcissist that he would think it appropriate. One of my callers pointed out, hey, Dave, what's the name of your show exactly? The David Madeira Show. So from a self-proclaimed narcissist, I want to introduce our guest, and I hold forth on politics every day for 3 hours a day on 94.3 FM The Talker. It's also streamed on the web at the dms.us, so you can go there. So I'll give all of the time to our state representatives, both of whom are heroes of the conservative movement. And on his way out, John Fund apologized to Representative Metcalf, the first of our two panelists today, because he said, you really are the hero in Pennsylvania. The Voter ID Act is a critical piece, It's a critical piece of legislation which the left was able to hold off on for one election, and I think it's something that's very important. Both Brent Bozell and John Fund pointed out some, I think, very encouraging things, and I remind our listeners of this all the time. We complain about the media, but frankly, when something is aired on MSNBC that's outrageous, it reaches far more people when Brent Bozell and Rush Limbaugh and guys like me cover it than when it's originally aired. And that's because what Brent said is so true. We are the new media. We have the ability to influence people. Our words are more trusted than the mainstream media. And sometimes I think we forget that. One of the people, though, who doesn't forget that is Representative Darrell Metcalf. And if I was to go into all of the areas where he's been a leader, where he's been at the forefront of the conservative movement in Pennsylvania, we would just spend the rest of the day here. So I'll let his record speak for itself. But I do want to also introduce you to Representative Stephen Bloom. He is a lawyer, a legislator, and ironically also an unabashed Christian. He's written 2 books. The most recent one is called They've Crossed the Line, and he'll be signing this after his presentation. And then the other one is called The Believer's Guide to Legal Issues. I haven't had a chance to read either one of these because I just got them signed, and I would encourage you to do the same. But I did skim them, and they look like very valuable additions to the literature. His personal story is remarkable, and it's in the book, so I would encourage you to get it. But I want to welcome him because, as he pointed out to me, while Representative Metcalf has been identified as the #1 conservative in the Pennsylvania House, he's got to watch his back because Stephen Bloom is closing in as #2. So I want to start by giving the floor to the #1 conservative in Pennsylvania, Representative Metcalf.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Good morning. I was asked to talk with you about the Second Amendment today in the 6 minutes that I have to start the program off, and then we're going to go into some Q&A, and I guess anything goes at that point that Dave will shoot at Steve and I. But great to be with everybody here. I've been talking across the state on the Second Amendment issue for the last 2.5 months, and I'm still scheduled through the end of this month and into next month to still continue to talk around the state on the Second Amendment issue, which has become a very hot topic. And as you look at issues that are out there, the Second Amendment isn't a fiscal issue, isn't a social issue, it's a constitutional issue, right? And I'm talking to you as both a state legislator, a veteran, and a citizen. And the Constitution needs to be protected from all 3 vantage points. As a veteran, while I was in the military, in the U.S. Army, I raised my hand and I swore to uphold and defend the U.S. Constitution. And that's an oath that I took for a lifetime, not just for the 4 years that I served active duty. And Steve and I have both taken that oath again as state legislators. And I've taken that oath now 8 times, being into my 8th term of office now, to uphold and defend the Constitution. Now, the Constitution of the United States is very clear in the Second Amendment that our right to bear arms should be protected. But Article 1, Section 21 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and a lot of folks don't realize, is even stronger language than the Second Amendment, that the right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people questioning that right, aren't there? Well, the Second Amendment, Article 1, Section 21, the Constitution, those areas of the Constitution, the right to bear arms, wasn't put there so we could be duck hunters or deer hunters. It was put there so that the people could protect themselves, and not just against the criminal element, although that's important, but protect themselves from tyranny, Isn't that right? Now, there's only two ways that you defend liberty, either with military force or political force. And we are blessed to live in a nation, in a state, where we can still defend our liberty politically, aren't we? And we need to do that. And that's what this conference is about, and what so many of the groups that are represented here are about, and what citizens have become more actively engaged on, is to exercise their political might, because we must do that to protect the Constitution, to protect our right to bear arms. And that might was shown recently with the defeat of Pat Toomey's amendment on the gun control bill. Now, here in Pennsylvania, Pat has helped me to make an even greater argument for the strongest piece of legislation that's been introduced since I've been in the legislature to stand up against the federal government. And that's House Bill 357. And it's numbered that for a reason, after the 357 Magnum. 357 would nullify any future federal gun control measures, whether it's coming out of Obama's executive orders, congressional action, or judicial activism. I have 75 sponsors on the bill, 71 Republicans, 4 Democrats. We need more Democrats. Castle Doctrine passed, I think it was 3 or 4 to 1 last session. We have Democrat and Republican legislators that have shown that they support the Second Amendment by voting for legislation that would advance and regain some of the rights that we've lost over the years on the right to bear arms. We need more sponsors on that bill to show my leadership that we have the votes to pass it. And I would encourage you to contact your legislators and ask them, Democrat or Republican, to stand up for you, the people. Because in the absence or in the presence of federal violations of our Constitution, of our rights, it's incumbent upon the states to stand up for the people, to stand up for the 10th Amendment, for states' rights, to stand up for the Second Amendment, to stand up for the people's rights. We gave the government limited powers at the federal level, not exhaustive powers. The federal government has a very limited role in our lives, don't they? Now, some of my colleagues have been making this argument that this is unconstitutional to tell the federal government that they can't pass this type of legislation. It's because of the Supremacy Clause, which is basically that if there's a federal law conflicts with a state law, the federal law is supreme. But the feds can't pass a law that's in violation of the Constitution and then claim supremacy, and that's what they're trying to do. And that's what some of my colleagues at the state level, who are too cowardly to stand up for the people, are making this argument so that they don't have to be put on the spot to stand up for a bill that will tell the courts, we're not going to take this anymore. To tell the feds and Obama, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to stand up for the people. So the Supremacy Clause doesn't work. The states created the federal government, didn't we? The federal government is not the creator, the states are. And we need to send that kind of a message. There's been legislation like this passed or put forth around the country. Kansas just recently passed it and signed it into law, and we're hoping to move it forward here in Pennsylvania, but we won't do that without your help. And before we get to the Q&A side, I would encourage all of you, as you leave here today, and it's great to see so many people here, but it's important to take our message out to the rest of the citizens around the state, to educate your friends, your neighbors, your fellow church members, your fellow workers, to educate them on the fact that citizens need to stand up for the Constitution, because there's legislators that won't. I had a legislator admit under interrogation back in 1999 that he hadn't even read Article 1, Section 21, or the Second Amendment of the Constitutions after being sworn in many times and swearing to uphold and defend the Constitution. How in the world do you defend something you haven't read? Right? And whether you're a veteran or an elected official or someone who has taken the oath of office or not to defend the Constitution, I encourage every one of you to embrace the oath to defend the Constitution as your patriotic duty as an American. Because we need every American to embrace that oath. Defend your Constitution, defend my Constitution, and we need to join together to do it. So I look forward to the Q&A and look forward to what Steve has to say.
Thank you, Representative Metcalf. It's a great job, but as a radio talk show host, I just want to encourage you to work on expressing yourself a little more. Kind of open up and share what you really feel. Somebody else who's not at all, and I think it's very encouraging that we have this panel here, the #1 and #2 conservative in the state legislature, Representative Metcalf being a seasoned legislator, and Representative Bloom, who just came in 2010 as part of the Tea Party. Representative Bloom, what would you say are the important issues? I know we've asked you to talk about property taxes, and I hope you'll address that, but what are the priority issues for us?
Well, I think we've talked about key issues already, such as protecting our Second Amendment rights. And we just heard Mr. Fund speaking about the critical importance of checking the power of the public sector unions in Pennsylvania, whether that's through right-to-work legislation or the Paycheck Protection Act that would actually ultimately prevent them from being subsidized by the government and government employees collecting their dues for them. Those are crucial issues that sort of lay the framework. Other issues, we still continue in Pennsylvania to have essentially the worst business tax environment of any state. And because of that, we continue to lose jobs, whether they're union jobs or private sector jobs. We are losing jobs on a regular basis to other states that are flat out competing us. We have the highest corporate net income tax in the world, not only of any state, but at 9.9%, our corporate net income tax is higher than anywhere else. So if a company is looking to build a plant, hire people, and they're looking at Pennsylvania, the first thing they're going to ask is, what's the tax environment like in Pennsylvania? They'll see this 9.99% corporate net income tax, and they're going to look elsewhere. We've seen that time and time again. Businesses that grow in Pennsylvania encounter the same problem. They think to themselves, there's got to be a better environment for us, and they leave. In my district, which is actually just west of us here in this very county, we've lost a couple of major manufacturers to Tennessee, to North Carolina, places where there's a more favorable tax environment and a more fair labor union environment. So those are crucial issues. Another aspect of the tax issue that I've been working on a lot is the death tax, the inheritance tax. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that continues to impose a death tax on assets that are passed at the passing of the owner of those assets. And that includes business owners, our small businesses, people who have been thrifty, have been frugal, have worked hard to create productive assets, resources that will be used to create jobs and create the products and services that consumers need, and ultimately will build prosperity, generate income, and ultimately will generate some revenue for the state treasury as well through all the various taxes they pay. But under Pennsylvania law, we literally penalize these people for their thrift. We penalize them for their investment because when the principal owner of a business dies, their assets are subject to tax, and it often forces the business to liquidate assets, or sometimes to even liquidate the entire business because their margins are tight. They don't have a lot of liquidity. They have to sell the building, sell critical equipment, shut down the business sometimes, lay off employees, reduce their ability to compete with other businesses in other states, and ultimately we're hurting our small business people and our family-owned businesses by imposing this death tax that most other states don't have. We're also driving people out of Pennsylvania. I've worked in my previous work as an attorney, I've worked with clients who came to see me who were trying to work on setting up residence in other states so that their assets would not be subject to our death tax. We're driving out the people who could be the mentors, the folks that would help our young entrepreneurs learn how to run a business, provide them wisdom and counsel. Instead, they're fleeing to other states. So I've got a bill right now that's running, House Bill 48. It's been through the House Finance Committee that would end the death tax in Pennsylvania on family-owned businesses so that they could keep those businesses in operation, keep generating the jobs, and allow those businesses to prosper into the next generation.
Very good. Wow. Very exciting to hear what's going on in Pennsylvania. I think as you guys were talking, it occurred to me that we'd love to help you with these issues, but we're not always sure what the right priority is to get behind at the state level. Nationally, there are organizations that tend to keep us up. How do we get from you guys, since you're number one and number two in the House, how do we get from you guys the information we need to know where we ought to spend our time and effort?
I think, you know, we heard John Fund talking about the legislation that Brian Cutler is authoring that we're co-sponsoring to try and ensure that union members are paying their dues individually and not having the government collect those for them, which is an important piece of legislation. Another piece of important legislation is right to work that I'm prime sponsor of, is to advance right to work in Pennsylvania. And sometimes in the legislature you see that legislators can't focus on a whole lot of issues at the same time. So liquor privatization is a perfect example.
That wasn't meant as a joke, but
it wasn't meant as a, I mean, we wish that they'd be able to multitask, many of them, and many of them are not able to, like Steve and I are able to. But I think it's important for our citizens to make sure that all of their interests are heard by their state legislator and that they don't just focus on one issue because then others get lost in the waves.
Right, but there are timely issues that you need our support on.
And in particular, something historic happened in the last month in Pennsylvania. For the first time in probably 30 or 40 years, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives voted to pass a bill that was vigorously opposed by organized labor. And that was House Bill 790, the bill to privatize, get the government out of the business of selling liquor in this state. And that's not a right-to-work bill. That's not a paycheck protection bill. But that bill signifies that there's something changing in the dynamic here. Because for the first time, organized labor lost a big battle in the Pennsylvania House. Hasn't happened, like I said, in decades. They have been winning vote after vote, fight after fight, intimidating us, preventing legislators from getting on the bills, as was talked about earlier today, causing bills to never even be brought to the floor for a vote so you can see who's who. Getting liquor privatization done, although it is not specifically a labor bill, it signifies the opportunity to start winning some victories, to level the playing field so that our businesses in Pennsylvania have a fair opportunity to be prosperous, grow jobs, and grow this economy in this state.
We spent so many months, the first several months of this session, we spent on just trying to focus resources on moving that bill out of the House. You know, if we spend that much time on every major policy and trying to get that done, it's going to be a decade or 2 decades before we really get pension reform done, before we really get liquor privatization finished because the Senate's balking at it right now, before we bring the state into right to work. And that's why it's important for citizens to demand that their legislators start to multitask and move on these major policies that we need to move Pennsylvania forward.
Okay.
And if we're going to win these battles, we can't do them one at a time, because that allows the opposition to organize and focus their defense on one bill at a time. We need to be moving prevailing wage. We need to be moving right to work. We need to be moving paycheck protection and liquor privatization all at the same time, so that they cannot simply stop one, stop the next one, stop the next one.
It was mentioned last night about the the best offense being a good defense, and I don't go from that strategy. I lead a strong offense continually. And that's what you need to require your legislators to do, is lead an offense. You know, get them to stay off the golf course, out of the college classrooms while they're taking courses, while they're serving. You know, get them to stop the part-time employment that they're doing on the outside also. Tell them if you're going to be a legislator, focus on legislating and put your energy into representing the people and moving Pennsylvania forward.
Okay. All right, so I want to explore this because we have a unique opportunity here. We have 2 self-motivated conservatives who don't need to be pried. What is it from your experience in the legislature that will help us? What are the kinds of conversations we need to have with our state legislators, representatives and senators, that will get them off the stick? What do we need to say to them? What will motivate them?
Well, you need to be in constant contact with them, first of all. You know, giving an accountability or performance review every 2 years, every 4 years is not enough. You wouldn't do that with your business. You wouldn't leave somebody in charge of it for 2 years, say, I'll be back in 2 years and give you a performance review, and we'll see if you're going to continue to manage my business. You need to be in constant contact with your elected representatives, whether it's county level, state level, local level, federal level, and you need to make sure that they're hearing from you and from your friends a message on what you want them to do, and you want to give them your marching orders. And you need to do that through email, through phone calls, through visits to the office, through visits to the Capitol, but you need to be vigilant in that. We don't have enough citizens doing that. We need more citizens doing that, because if you strike the fear into them that they will not get reelected the next time, then they will start doing what you want. One of my colleagues had told me, well, you know, to vote, and it was a Republican, you know, to vote for this type of legislation with prevailing wage reform, you know, they'd have to be able to replace all those union workers that come into my district to work the polls on election day, you know, the buses they send in. Well, you need to make them know that if they're going to go with the unions, you're going to be on buses coming in and working against them on election day.
Okay.
And I'm sitting here, and I'm fortunate to be in the actual county I represent, so it may be a skewed sample, but I'm looking out here and I see citizen activists from my own district sitting right here in front of me. And they are out there. They're part of Cumberland County Action. They're part of our Carlisle Area 912 group. And they've organized. They're on Facebook. They're on social media. They're constantly in contact with me via email. And wherever I go, I see them and they see me. And that's critical. As Darrell said, for them to be visible and make their presence known is so essential, because the only other groups that we hear from on a regular basis are organized labor, PSEA in particular. PSEA mobilizes their troops week after week on different issues. Our inboxes get bombarded. We get postcards. We get phone calls from members of PSEA trying to stop whatever progress we're trying to make on school choice, on pension reform, on all these critical issues. They're organized. They're out there. They're vocal. And we need to be doing the same thing, encouraging our friends and neighbors to get involved, and in particular to do so in areas where research to find out where your legislator stands. I mean, I don't need to have my arm twisted on these key issues, because this is why I ran for office. This is why I'm here. I'm here to do this. I'm here to fight these battles. But we need to focus our efforts on those legislators who are on the fence, or are unwilling to commit, or unwilling to jump into the fray.
It's important to recognize that because a legislator says they're for something, they're not necessarily for it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So there's political cover that was talked about where certain votes aren't cast just so certain members aren't put on the spot. But when you've got members that are co-sponsoring certain bills and then going behind the scenes to leadership and saying, don't you dare run that bill, because I put my name on it, but I don't really want to have to vote on it. That's why you need to be at their office letting them know that you're watching and that you want them to actually lobby, to actually move legislation, not just co-sponsor it.
All right, well then let's, and I appreciate you guys, this is very valuable information, because I think a lot of times we the people don't know exactly what's going to work, and that's what this is about. Let's talk about liquor privatization. You guys have invested a lot in this, and it is a sort of a watershed moment. What's going on in the Senate, and what can we do?
Well, I think only the Senate can answer what's going on in the Senate. The rumors that we're hearing out of the Senate aren't good. Yeah. From what I've heard from one of the lobbyists working or hearing about the issue, the word out of the Senate isn't good. That's why the Senate needs to hear from you that you want to see privatization. You don't want to see a continuation of status quo. You don't just want more consumer choice at more facilities. You want the government out of the liquor business so that the marketplace can actually work and that people can grow businesses and we can see more opportunities and see a reduced cost of
Understand the language being used here. If you hear the word modernization,
right,
be very, very wary, because that means keeping the government in the business of selling alcohol and putting some window dressing on it, keeping that government monopoly intact. And you hear that word modernization coming out of the Senate, that's not what we want. That doesn't get the job done. Be very careful about that.
That's right.
I wish we had more time, because both of you are very articulate and extremely helpful in revealing what's going on. I appreciate it. There's one other issue. John Fund mentioned it. It's Wisconsin. It's paycheck protection. Where is that bill, and what are the chances that we're going to see in Pennsylvania the same kind of reforms, and therefore the essentially defunding of the left that we see in Wisconsin?
I mean, that's the forefront of the battle. It's not going to be easy. It's tough for Pennsylvania legislators to realize they can take on big labor, because for so long big labor has been absolutely dominant in the Senate and the House and in both parties. And so there's been a lot of fear in the building. People are afraid to take on these forces that are, they've got such a reputation for being so powerful. Again, we're starting to see the cracks in the wall. Liquor privatization was the first crack. Some of the change in the dynamic of the members of the House is the first sign that we're making progress. But to get paycheck protection done is not going to be an easy thing. Don't kid yourself. And it may not happen quickly, and it's going to take courage on the part of many of us to stand up and be willing to take a lot of flack.
To stop the unions from utilizing government resources for their own political campaigns, which there's people in jail for using government resources for their campaigns. We shouldn't be allowing it to happen through law, that we're allowing the unions to do so. We need to change that. Right now, a lot of the work's going on behind the scenes. Brian Cutler has circulated co-sponsor memo on it. We're hoping that the legislation will ultimately come to my committee as the chair of the state government committee, so that we can actually move on that legislation in the near future. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I think it's within our reach. This past December, I had several legislators come to me after Michigan, after they went right to work, and approach me about, Darrell, when are we going to do right to work in Pennsylvania, and what can I do to help? And I've never had that before in the last 15 years. So there's more momentum than ever for members of the legislature, more members willing to stand up against the public sector unions and try and ensure that we protect the taxpayers. So we have more momentum than ever. We need to continue to build that, and we can only do that with all of your help. is to build that momentum. And I think Brian's legislation that he talked about, Brian Cutler, Representative Cutler's legislation, to stop the unions from using our government resources as their collection agent, I think that is within our reach and is one of the first incremental changes that we could take that moves us toward right to work in Pennsylvania.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for all of your tireless effort and for coming and spending a little time here. I wish we did have some more time.
You're welcome.
But we're just
Thank
out.
you, David.
And I want to remind you of what you've been hearing this morning, which is that it really comes down to us. We are the new media. We are the ones who will provide the cover and the support for these guys, number one and number two, in the State House to get done what needs to be done. It's sort of like when you go out surfing or riding the waves. A wave comes along and sometimes you catch it and you ride it like we did in 2010 and you feel energized, and sometimes the wave washes over you like 2012 and we feel overwhelmed. But remember this, there's always another wave coming and we just need to be prepared to ride it. Thank you.